We're going to talk about virtual presentations, how to be more effective for video conferencing anyway. Now, imagine making a business presentation, just like it says there, and everybody that you're talking to is behind a wall. You're trying to talk back and forth over this wall all the time, constantly trying to share, you're trying to have those folks on the other side of the wall imagine everything that you're doing, which is very difficult to do. And it's frustrating. I mean, I look like that all the time. But, and Rich actually looks like that all the time too. And that's exactly what happens when we try to communicate via like video or a phone or a chat conference or something like that. And the presenter, like myself, we can't see the audience reaction. So we have no idea what you're thinking. Some people don't care, but it's a good idea to care, because that way you can adjust what you're trying to say to what the audience's reaction is. For the audience, it's just a boring voice or video a lot of times. And this happens as parts of our usual communication are missing. Notice it talks about body language. You can't tell your body language at all. Eye contact. A lot of times people, when you're looking around the room, you can't make eye contact with anybody, especially on video conference. There's a very little two-way interaction sometimes, because the audience sometimes seems intimidated to interact via video conference. And you can't tell their reactions like, oh my gosh, or, this kind of, I gotta be kind of look thing. So you can't really tell that stuff. Now, the only way to make a successful virtual presentation is to engage the audiences continuously. You got to do that. Now, engaging the audiences includes like setting up offline. That's talking about equipment and testing and everything of your presentation before you actually go live. It's very important to do that. A lot of people just walk in, lately have just walked into to give their presentation. They have no idea. They didn't bring a computer with them. They didn't tell us they needed a computer. They didn't tell us they were going to do a presentation. There's a lot of different things that they don't do ahead of time. And sometimes connectivity to where they're going to be is dead. So they need to show up so they could test their equipment before we even get started. Using multiple modes of communication, a lot of that has to do with exactly that. Before the thing even starts, make sure that your information is available elsewhere, just like I provided information on that VDH webpage I just showed you. Make sure there's other ways to get the information. The video conference should reinforce everything that's out there already in regards to resources, and the resources should also reinforce the video conference itself. And allocate time for interaction. Make sure that you don't just throw it up to the wind and say, okay, any questions? And everybody on the video conference and everybody in the room starts talking at the same time. That becomes a real mess. So make sure you don't do that. And using your voice effectively. The tone of your voice. If you talk in monotone like this and that kind of thing, everybody's going to hate you. You're not going to get very good reviews for your presentation. So don't do that, because after 15 minutes they've tuned out, especially if you're going to do a long one. They've tuned out and they're off doing something else. They don't care anymore. And make sure you stick to your schedule. That's why we tried to start right at noon today. So, setting up offline, exactly as I said. Get to your video conference early and test all the equipment on both sides. Test your connection. Test your PowerPoint, make sure it's going to work. If you've got videos in your PowerPoint, you can't just walk in with a flash drive, plug it in the computer, and hope they're going to work. Because if you don't have your videos set up right with your PowerPoint, it ain't going to happen. So make sure you test all that stuff first. Go through your entire presentation, beginning to end. Now, like I said, time spent adjusting the equipment is very boring for the audience. They've basically, as soon as you start having equipment problems, you're going to lose, on average, between every minute, you're going to lose 10% of your audience. Every minute. That's a statistic that's out there that I just pulled out. It's kind of scary to think about that, because if you're doing something for 400 or 500 people statewide, and all of a sudden you're losing an average of 40 to 50 people every minute because you're having equipment difficulties, you're just taking a huge chunk of your folks out of there. Okay, everybody talks about this in face-to-face and live meetings, but this is actually something that happens in video conferences and webinars too, and phone conferences. I heard this on a phone conference the other day from the CDC. Somebody at the CDC, they had a neat little do you want my body? That kind of ringer on their phone, and it was ringing in the background the whole time they were trying to talk. That was kind of embarrassing for those people. So you got to be careful with that. Just mute your cell phone, switch off other stuff like radios, TVs, you know, that kind of stuff in the room where you're going to be doing this kind of thing. Like right now, my phone has I turned off all the alerts on my cell phone so that none of those come through. Now, like we talked about using multiple modes of communication, this is something that a lot of people don't think about. I should have done this, and I didn't get a chance to get the presentation completed before and posted to the website before this particular thing happened, but there are other resources that kind of tell you the same thing. But if you're going to do a presentation, it's a real good idea to provide a link to it or email it ahead of time to everybody so that they can have it there in front of them while you're trying to do your presentation online. You might think, well, that's kind of counterintuitive. Why would you want to do that? Because you're doing it all on through the video conference. What happens at the video conference? All the video part of it goes down. All you have is the audio. What are they going to do? You know, what if it doesn't work? Your screen freezes on the video conference. They can still hear you, but they can't see anything that you're doing. So at that point, having that presentation in front of them is very key. And that's why linking it on a website, like I linked those other resources that I showed you before, is a good way to handle that. Now, allocate time for interaction. Notice there's things there like questions and polls and opinions. That sits on top of your presentation. That's how you get people to interact with you. Ask questions, do the occasional poll. You know, you might find a way to do that. There's actual ways you can do that through the web using a service called Poll Anywhere. You can take polls while you're doing this, and people can access it from where they are. Or you can, you know, just ask for opinions. You know, say, how many people in the room here have whatever opinion about my look today? You like purple shirts, that kind of thing, you know. And then you ask the people out in the video conference land the same thing. Now, since people can't see each other, they speak at the same time, and the presenter becomes confused. Now, look at me. I'm the presenter. I'm easily confused. So if everybody talks to me at the same time, you're going to see this real glazed look on my face, and that light bulb dims right above my head kind of thing. Make sure that's why, as a presenter, it's going to be you're responsible for controlling this whole question and answer thing. Allocate time for each person, or and pause between points for questions. Like, you know, I've done it in here before. I usually ask for questions in the room, and because we don't have a whole lot of people out in the Polycom land, I ask, does anybody out in video conference land have any questions? However, there are other ways to do this too. You could also ask, set up, you know how we use AnyMeeting all the time? You can set up an AnyMeeting and have a chat in there, and have people log into the AnyMeeting and use the chat and put your questions in the chat, and then you can answer them yourself like that. There are many ways to control this. Try to keep from that mass confusing conversation thing happening on the video conference, or on a phone conference for that matter, or a webinar. It works for all of them. And enforce some interaction occasionally. Ask questions, like do a poll, whatever. Make sure you do something like that. Like right now, like in the room, how many people here are actual video conference presenters? How often? I mean, have you done it a lot in the room? In video conference land, like the person I'm looking at right now is Steve Reichel, but in the rest of the folks that are out there, like Steve, you do video conferences, right?
That is correct.
All right. And Rich, I can see you there. You do video conferences, you know, and how many, you know, just can somebody else out there give me an experience that they've had in using a video conference, in doing a video conference? Was it good? Was it bad? What have you? Anybody in video conference land? Okay, well, that means I'm pretty boring. But, but anyway, just try to do that kind of thing. And it brings it brings their attention back to the screen, especially if they're sitting there messing with their Blackberries or what have you. It brings their attention back to the screen. Now, use your voice effectively. If you have enthusiasm in your voice, people are going to believe you. Just ask all of our politicians, that kind of thing. And it's key to keep your audience engaged. Don't act like you don't want to be there. Because if you act like you don't want to be there, then everybody sitting there in front of you is going to act like they don't want to be there. So you don't want to do that. So make sure that the enthusiasm in your voice is key. Now, this is a tip, and I agree with this completely. If you're going to do something like this, a presentation like this, and you're going to be in a room all by yourself, and your only audience is in the video conference land, that's going to really, it's kind of intimidating. If you've never done it before or you've only done it a couple of times, it's always nice to have an audience in front of you of some kind. Just have at least one person in the room with you so that you can seem natural, that you can get that enthusiasm in your voice, that you can really seem like that you really get into the content and you believe in the content and you want everybody else to believe the content too. That's a tip I completely believe in. That's why I really prefer, webinars for me. I'm used to doing them now, but when I first started doing webinars, I'm sitting in my office by myself. That was kind of intimidating because the only people that I knew that were out there were on the webinar itself. So have somebody in the room with you while you're doing your presentation, if at all possible. Just a tip. Now, don't forget you're on camera. You'd be surprised what we've seen on people that are on camera. When you're presenting on a video conference, yes, I'm doing a presentation right now, and a lot of the presentation is all that people might be seeing out there in video conference land. However, if you look at your TV, some of you might have a picture-in-picture. This one has a picture-in-picture, and I'm sitting there in that picture-in-picture. If their settings for their particular location are set up this way, they're going to see the presentation and you. And if that happens, don't forget you're on camera, and you don't want to be sitting there scratching your head or blowing your nose, whatever you're going to be doing. You don't want people to see that on camera. Like it says here, don't do anything you wouldn't want the public to see. Don't do anything. And also make sure the camera's aimed properly. I've seen a lot of video conferences where some folks out there have their cameras aimed at the top of their head, so all you can see is the bald spot on the top of their head. So that. Make sure your camera's aimed properly, that you don't look kind of silly when you're doing your presentation. And treat the video conference as if it were a TV show. If there's an audience in a room, you got to address the camera periodically. Like you guys out there in video conference land, I need to address you as if you were a member of the audience over here. That's what you should do. Don't forget that you have an audience right there. That camera is your window into the rest of your audience. So make sure that you talk to the camera as if it was part of your audience in the room. You're in a TV show. That's what you need to think. You're a newscast kind of thing. Now, dress for success. Try to wear subdued clothing, and pastel colors work nice. This is an example of what not to wear. This is actually on a website that talks about what not to do on video conferencing. So, make sure that you dress appropriately, that, you don't wear something that totally blends into the background. Make sure you wear subdued colors, that kind of thing. Like me, I'm wearing this subdued purple and gray pants. So that's a real good fit for video conferencing. Location, location, location. Try not to place yourself between a bright light and the camera. If the bright light is behind you, as you can see right here, you get a silhouette. They can't really see your face. It's also hard on the eyes at the other end of the presentation. Like right now, the way this room is configured, this is a bad thing. This window behind me should not be there. So we're actually working on possibly reconfiguring this room. So, but try not to do that. Neutral backgrounds are nice. This is kind of neutral, but it's kind of light. We're talking about changing this background. This kind of background up to the front, the more subdued greens and grays and blues, that kind of stuff, work a lot better in regards to backgrounds for video conferencing. And try not to have too many extraneous background items in the background. You see this picture here? See that guy throwing a football behind him? That's the office in the background there. Try not to do that. If you have a lot of extraneous items in the background and you're trying to tell somebody something very important, they're not going to pay attention to you. They're going to pay attention to that guy throwing the football or whatever behind you. So make sure that you get rid of that. The one on the right is a much better situation for video conferencing with the neutral background. Now, audio. This is a problem. A lot of people think video conferencing, the only problems are video. It's like, no, it's not. We have audio problems too. Don't shout into the microphone. A lot of people will bend down and yell into the microphone, you know, like as if they think that people can't hear them. They'll yell into the microphone. You just moved your head out of the camera shot anyway. So you need to make sure you don't shout into the microphone. The microphone's sensitive. It'll pick you up. I'm actually talking too loud for this microphone right now. So the microphone will pick you up and adjust. So don't worry about that. All right? And make sure you know your mute button. That's your friend. You don't want to have happen like what happened to our fine vice president the other several times where he has an open mic and says something he doesn't want everybody to hear. So make sure that you know your mute button's there, and if you want to say something that doesn't need to go out to the entire world, you press the mute button. Make sure you're muted. Now, create a schedule and stick to it. People are going to love you if you do that, because if you don't stick to the schedule and you go over, then everybody's like looking at their watch. They're not listening to you anyway. They're going to get out of there and they're going to head out. And a lot of times if they're on the other end of the video conference, they're just going to get up and leave. So you've just lost them anyway. So stick to your schedule, okay? Rehearse your presentation so you stick to your schedule. That's a good idea. And if other discussions come up, sidebar discussions, people want to talk to you about the subject at hand, but it's not really, it's going to take too long in your schedule, take it offline. Talk to them one-on-one, do a webinar with whoever needs to do it, use a discussion group, whatever you want to do, just take it offline and do it a different way. And that goes right along with the multiple modes of communication that I talked about earlier. It goes right along with that. Now, the conference does not end with the presentation. You can follow up with job aids, the video, that kind of stuff. On these brown bag lunches, we usually have a video, we usually record them, so that video is actually linked on that page I showed you earlier. There's usually some job aids there. There's a link to available training courses, whatever. All that stuff is there, and that's the follow-up. So you point people to that as they leave. And then you've got all these things that reinforce everything you talked about. And it's a good idea to post your presentation there too, wherever you have your job aids and such. And I'm going to do this after we're done. Now, to recap, don't forget, set it up offline. You got to go in and make sure your equipment works ahead of time. Do that. Make sure you do that. That's one of the things, the biggest problems we have are people showing up that didn't tell us their equipment needs. They show up at the last second with all kinds of equipment changes, you know, that kind of stuff. Make sure you show up early, at least a half an hour ahead of time, so that Rich or I, whoever's handling the video conference, can test your connection and test your presentation. Okay? Use multiple modes of communication. I just got through talking about that again. The multiple modes of communication, you know, make sure you send you can either send your presentation out ahead of time or provide a link to it so that people can have it in case all your video goes down, all you have is audio or something like that. Also, that goes along with a follow-up. Give time for interaction, the questions, things like that. Just you occasionally do that throughout your presentation. Make sure that you can do polling. Like I said, that poll anywhere thing, I can't sing its praises high enough because a lot of people use it, and you can actually use it with your smartphone devices and have people take polls with their smartphones on there, and it comes up and you can bring it up on the screen. Make sure you give time for the interaction though. Don't let everybody talk at once. That can be a real mess. Stick to the schedule. I just skipped over the voice thing, but stick to your schedule. Make sure you stick to the time allotted. I mean, going under, people, that's okay, but make sure you get the information out that you wanted to get out. But you can just try not to go over on your presentation schedule. Use your voice effectively. Make sure that you have the proper inflection in your voice. Talk to people as if you're talking in a conversation. Now, try not to talk in monotone, that kind of stuff like I talked about before, because people will tune you out and they will leave. Also, follow up, that goes right along with multiple modes of communication. Follow up with job aids, your presentation, what have you. All the information that reinforces the stuff that you talked about during your presentation. Okay? Now, of course, you can make your next virtual presentation a powerful one, but besides that, there's more than one way to skin this cat. You've got to do what best fits you. Because me, I tend to be a talker, so I'm able to present myself. I'm also used to be a politician, so that probably is why I'm able to present myself like this. But for you, you may want to have a different way that you handle yourself. Just make sure you engage the audience. That's the key. That's the key to your video presentations. And besides that, your camera placement, things like that, the tech stuff. The key is definitely to engage your audience out there. Okay. I'm going to go back to brown bag lunch sessions, but does anybody have any questions for me in the room first? In the room, anybody have any questions for me? Yes, ma'am.
One of the challenges that we have is that we do video conference, and then we also have it hooked up to a conference call line, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the challenges is trying to ask the question and then get responses, not only from the site that you're at, but I have multiple sites, and then I have the conference line. And usually what happens is people on the conference line, they wind up talking over each other.
Mm-hmm.
Any suggestions in terms of how I can get that interaction and not have people on the conference line talking over each other? I'm okay with.
Can I answer that, Brad?
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
I think the best thing to do is to have a list of the sites that you got. That includes the people that are on the conference call also, which the conference call is dialed into the video conference. So you hear all the audio coming from the same place. My recommendation would be just to have a list of the sites that are on, which includes the people that are dialed in by phone, and call on the ones to make it a little more orderly. I would, call somebody's name or a store if you're dealing with WIC, or if you're dealing, if you want a site, say, Virginia Beach or Norfolk, can you comment on this, or do you have any questions or comments on this? If you're asking for a specific store, I don't know the exact stores you guys deal with, but if the person's name is at the store or the store name, I would ask them instead of just asking, does anybody have any questions? And put a time limit on it, questions or number of questions from the beginning. If you set those parameters at the beginning, like when we do have a question period, we'll allow everybody to ask one, and responses or things like that. I limit people to 1 or 2 minute responses to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions and make comments.
Yep, that's one way to do it. There's also, if you want to use the polling, one of these polling sites too, you could possibly do that as well and have people put in their answers via the poll or set up a chat in like any meeting, which is our free approved video webinar app.
Any meeting, and we kept running up with a problem of firewall and not being able to use it because again, the audience that we're dealing with, the stores, okay, at the various locations, those don't tend to be the problem. The problem seems to be the conference call people, okay, that are coming in from many different locations. And if I could bring some structure to that process, I think our meetings will go a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to the, I think you could use something like Poll Anywhere too, to have people, allow people to submit answers to questions. But in regards to the AnyMeeting thing, it has a conference calling feature on it, and you can actually, the audio for the webinar can actually be through the conference call end of it. It doesn't have to be through a mic on the actual computer, and that's a firewall issue we've run into many times with many different webinar applications, is that the Vita has blocked a lot of the ports that allow you to speak through a microphone in a webinar. So, but we use the phone instead, and AnyMeeting has the conference calling capability too, that people call into a conference call line, and that's where the audio for the webinar is.
Okay.
That's one way to do it. There's multiple, like I said, there's more than one way to skin this cat, so there's multiple ways you could do that. If you have a lot of sites, going through each site individually is going to be tough.
I only have 3 sites.
Okay. Well, I mean, if I'm talking about for the people that call in on the phone too, that's a lot. So you're going to have, it's going to be really tough to go through every one of those, even if you know all of them. So it might be a good idea to try to collect your questions via chat or some other way like that, and then answer them as you go. Just go through the chat questions, kind of thing. Any other questions in the room here before I move on to the? Okay, we don't have very many folks out in video conference land, but does anybody out there have a question for me regarding anything I went over so far?
Hey, Brad.
Yes, Steve.
Shocking it's me, isn't it? Not so much a question, but some comments, things that I've learned in the past. When you're responding to questions and comments that are in the room, you can't always assume that people at remote sites heard the question that you're answering, so you should make a point to repeat the question or the comment before responding to it, so those at remote sites understand what you're responding to. And then other things too is sometimes people don't realize that the mic's very sensitive to people very close, so don't be sliding the mic around like that or shuffling papers next to the mic, or drumming fingers. These are just things that we've learned at some of our Polycom sites.
Yep, he's exactly right, because when I move the microphone around, it's going to pick up the movement. If I'm doing anything around the microphone, it's going to pick up whatever I'm doing. And believe it or not, in the past, we've had people at very high levels that just lay their papers down on top of the microphone. And it not only muffles, but as they move the papers, it's just annoys everybody out in the video conference land. So just try to keep stuff away from the microphone and try not to do what Steve just said, because you're gonna irritate a lot of people out there. Any other questions or comments from the field?
Brad, I had one other comment along Sheila's, or the training that I've done in the past. Sometimes I've also had people submit questions in advance. I'm not exactly sure if you said that, so that from different sites. So when you get to the question and answer period, you've already got questions, because they've got the material in advance that maybe they've reviewed, and you can then cover the questions that way instead of having to open it up and have them ask the question. That'll save you a little bit of time also.
Yep. So like I said, whichever way fits you the best, because there's a lot of them. How I do things may be different than the way you do things. But the guidelines, the general guidelines I had out there should point you in the right direction. Any other questions out in the field? How about here in the room? Any other questions out here in the room? All right. Well, thank you all very much.
From the mountains to the ocean and everything in between. VDH, the Virginia Department of Health, Office of Risk Communication and Education.